This is the panel, just so you're sure you're in the right place, where we're going to take on Silicon Valley and technology jumping in and helping facilitate this race for cures. And we've got really a fabulous panel with much more to say than we can fit into our 45 minutes. And we're going to try to keep it to that so that then we can have 10 or 15 minutes for questions at the end. So please think about your questions throughout, and we'll try to give you a chance to ask those. I'm Lindy Fishburne. I run a fund called Breakout Labs out of the Thiel Foundation, and we invest in very early stage hard science that's making an attempt to leave the lab and make a run at commercialization and getting in people's lives. So these are very relevant questions in my day-to-day. So what I'll do to start us off is just a quick intro so you know everybody who's up here, and then we'll go back through and have our panelists tell you a bit more about themselves. So we'll start with Lisa Sunan. Everybody can wave as we go through, right? Who is the managing member of Cardiation Capital and managing director at Venture Valkyrie Consulting up in the Bay Area. And Asha Nayak, who's the global medical director at Intel. And Lloyd Miner, who's with us from Stanford University, the dean at the School of Medicine. And Noah Kraft, who's the CEO of Science 37. And Linda Avey, who's the co-founder of 23andMe, and a company, Curious Inc. So what I wanted to do so that our panelists could get a better sense of our audience is ask you guys a couple polling questions. If you could raise hands on, let's see, anybody that has done genetic testing, swabbed a cheek, sent it in, way to go. Those are pretty good numbers. How about participated in a clinical trial? Nice. Willing to participate in a clinical trial if it were relevant to you. Okay, there you go, Noah. Those are good numbers there. How about who's wearing a wearable? That's a terrible phrase. Who's using a wearable today and tracking some part of your life through that wearable?
Wow.
How many of you have one in a drawer?
And you're shorting the company, that company stock. Okay, great. So this is a really engaged and educated group. We weren't sure what those numbers would look like, but that was well over 30-40% of you raised hands and have engaged. So kicking off on this question of Silicon Valley and tech companies joining the search for cures, and what it means when the tech industry, tech ideas, approaches, and timelines start to jump in and try to accelerate medical progress. And it means you have a lot of players that you may not have thought about in the healthcare space actually doing some really impactful work. So Asha, do you want to start us with what's going on at Intel and how you guys are approaching this?
Absolutely. So many people are not aware of this, but Intel has been dedicated to healthcare and healthcare advancement for nearly 20 years, with programs that started years ago around aging in place and understanding the issues around chronic disease and chronic disease management to things of the present, which I'd like to talk a little bit more about today. So our primary efforts right now are around enabling personalized medicine through data, with our initial focus being on cancer care. So the ultimate goal of these efforts is for every patient who's diagnosed with cancer to quickly learn what treatments are most likely to work in their tumor, what treatments are most likely to cause untoward side effects, importantly, in their case, and to be empowered by this information as they approach critical decisions in their own cancer care with their oncologists. Now, as many of you know, we're very far from this today in cancer care. Cancer, despite being a genetically driven disease, is approached phenotypically today. We diagnose it and we certainly treat it based on its phenotypic appearance due to limitations in science till now. And as many of you know, genomic sequencing is becoming a lot more accessible. Intel, who's been in healthcare for nearly 20 years, has been a privileged partner to many cancer institutions around the world in approaching this opportunity. So with more and more genomes being sequenced, the data from these genome sequences is still quite segmented and siloed around the world. So patients individually are not getting the full benefit from this, and the numbers are still very small. So as you might imagine, it's very difficult for a single cancer center to have enough cases, let alone a single oncologist to have enough cases to inform a patient that comes to their office with the data set that's available to the world, but not available to that particular person at the time that they need it. So oncologists and cancer centers have been coming to Intel for years. People don't know this. seeking our partnership to solve this problem of data sharing and data access. Today it happens, but it happens very ad hoc. It happens sporadically, and it happens in a way that's completely not scalable. So many of you might know if somebody, usually a VIP, has a cancer, their doctor is calling their colleagues around the world looking for tumors that resemble the cancer at hand, and maybe that person will have insights that most people with cancer unfortunately don't have access to. So Intel has developed something called a distributed analytics platform. We call it the Collaborative Cancer Cloud. It's a solution to this problem of collaboration, because collaboration is essential at solving this problem. What this platform, called the CCC, allows is for an investigator at one site to benefit from the data that's siloed in other institutions, and it does this without requiring the data to move. Now, those of you who've participated in earlier sessions at the Milken conference yesterday are aware that this has been a topic of much discussion. There's lots of reasons why data is siloed. There's good reasons, and then there's questionable reasons. It's difficult to move data. It's difficult to move it securely and rapidly. And there's proprietary issues around. I won't get into all the barriers, but we've overcome this with the Collaborative Cancer Cloud by taking the analytics and the query, which is really what's most important for an individual patient, and taking that to where the data resides. So the data doesn't have to move. It's a completely different model than what you've heard other technology companies coming forth with, which is how can we combine data sets, how can we own more data, consolidate it. It's the opposite of that. This is saying take the analytics and the question securely to the site where the data might reside. So what you have is the institutions that participate, and I'll tell you about a growing ecosystem of partners that we've evolved. They each get to define policies and boundary conditions around the usage of their data. So they can define, for example, I don't want my data to be used by a pharmaceutical company. I want it only to be used by academicians. Or they could say, we'd like it to be queried in this way for this purpose, but not that. And importantly, their own privacy rules and their own contracts with the patient in securing genomic data, clinical data, and imaging data resides with the data set. So it has a lot of power to do good work, and we're excited about it. We've signed on already some very marquee partners. We've built the system in collaboration with Oregon Health and Sciences University, and have signed on the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, which many of you know, and the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research, each of which have more than 15,000 full cases, genome sequenced and everything in cancer care. So we're really excited about the potential this has for revolutionizing and personalizing cancer treatment, but also the potential that a platform like this has for understanding much more common diseases like Alzheimer's disease and cardiovascular disease in the future.
Great, thank you. Lloyd, will you share what's happening at Stanford and taking this to the next level?
Absolutely. Thank you, Lindy, and good morning, everyone. Ever since people have been caring for the sick, we've been engaged in a frantic race of catch-up, oftentimes making diagnoses too late, requiring progressively more complicated treatments in order to control or cure diseases. For sure, we have tremendous opportunities now with genomics, with big data science, with personalization, to individualize the treatment of complex diseases as we've never had that opportunity before. But the real opportunity to change the future is to prevent the need for those treatments in the first place. So we hope to lead a biomedical revolution in precision health, with precision health being defined as the next generation of precision medicine. Precision medicine is focused on sick care. It's determining and applying the very best therapies based upon the individual's characteristics of disease. Precision health is focused on health care. It's using the same enablers of genomics, big data science, and personalization, but applying those in a predictive, proactive, and personalized way. So the way we'll know that we've succeeded collectively in precision health a decade from now is that the need for these complex treatments that are such an integral part of precision medicine will be less, because we've been more able to diagnose disease early, prevent disease early, and engage people in their health care in ways that's been a challenge in the past.
Great, thank you. Linda, you were one of the first people to get involved with individuals learning and knowing more about their data. Can you tell us what you're seeing now and what you're most excited about?
Well, yeah, so it was, I guess, about 11 years ago that I had the opportunity to get myself genotyped. I was working for a company that had the access to the technology, and we were testing out these new little saliva kits, and it was pretty exciting to think we could get DNA out of saliva. And so I was this guinea pig, and I thought, well, I'd love to have my data. And I went to our science lab and said, you know, would I be able to get that on a disk or something? And it kind of startled them, and they didn't quite know how to respond to that. And that's when the light bulb went on, that we, as human beings, were very curious about ourselves, and we're interested in learning more about ourselves, I think, for the most part. And so that was what really started this mission of thinking about genetics and people accessing their own information and creating an interface to help them understand that. But while I was still at 23andMe, I had already started thinking about what's the other half of this coin. Well, that's all the other data that we emit on a daily basis. And now we're in this time of Internet of Things. We have access to data from our wearables, from our environment, from sensors, from all kinds of places. But the problem now is it all goes into these, talk about silos like cancer, it's going into these company silos basically. And so with my new startup called We Are Curious, we're focusing on ways for people to bring that data together to start to make sense of it. Because I think from an N of one, like an individual person, there are applications to track your own data. So if you suffer from things like migraines, oftentimes your doctor will say, well, keep a diary. Just try to keep track of when you have your migraines. And maybe you'll see a pattern emerge with food you're eating, the environmental data. So that's sort of an N of one use case that we can easily accommodate. But beyond that, when we look at some of these other difficult conditions like autism and chronic fatigue, where the symptoms are all over the map, one patient's experience can be very different from another patient's, and we're already seeing a lot of activity around people trying to start tracking their data. So we're simply providing an easier way, hopefully, for people to do that. And then I think finally the thing that has been sort of missing in the healthcare system, and I think it plays more even into prevention and wellness, is the social component. We talk about behavior change being very difficult, but if you've got a social layer added onto this where people are comparing notes with each other, they're encouraging each other, they're able to talk to someone who understands what their situation is, that's what the web's built for. That's this ability to find other people who are like you and share your stories. And then there is a lot of interest in contributing that data to the research establishment. So what we're hoping to do is help people gather their data together, share it where they would like to, and hopefully the more places it's located, the more great information we'll get from it.
Great, thank you. Noah, you're in the trenches building a company that's trying to bring some of these treatments and interesting uses to bear for customers and patients. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so just by way of background, I'm a physician scientist who worked on cancer immunotherapy, vaccines for parasites, and microbiome work at UCLA. And over the last 5 or 6 years, a group of us has started a nationally scaled telemedicine company, an enterprise software company. And so I had this experience in clinical trials, software, and telemedicine. And a couple years ago, some friends at Qualcomm Life had introduced me to the innovation group at Genentech. And that was the first time I had thought about the societal problem of everyone wants to participate in clinical trials, like all of yourselves. So 90% of people want to participate, but why do 3% or less participate? And so I realized it was such a massive problem that after studying it for a while, a group of us who had this skill set decided it was worth quitting our jobs about. And so we started Science 37 as a platform company as a solution to help the people who want to participate get connected to the people that want to do the science, the scientists. So as a company, in our early days, we are the scientists. We work with IRBs, the FDA, and we do those clinical trials. And what we've done is created a new entity called a metasite. So instead of going through individual PIs and universities, we shift the center of research from the investigator to the patient themselves. And so that allows us to disrupt the architecture of the site-based model, and we can reach all the patients that want to participate. So in the last year or so, we've launched FDA-registered randomized controlled trials across multiple states, reaching patients that actually find us through Google and Facebook, and we enroll them from home. We bring the drug to their house. We bring a nurse to their house. We draw blood at the house and ship it to a lab. And so that model of decentralizing the trial through a metasite drastically accelerates the discovery process and lets the expert scientists connect to patients who want to participate. There's a couple impacts of what happens is, one is in our current trials, less than 5% of people are minorities. And in our trials, between 30 and 40% are minorities because we generally reach out to the whole population. So that's one great impact, is the conclusions you draw from the science is more applicable to the whole population. The other is our performance in trials is exponentially faster than the site-based model, which we've demonstrated already. So in the next month, we're about to launch entire trials where we're going to enroll 400 patients, randomized controlled trial, cold drug, a live bacterial drug. We'll never meet the patients in 400 patients in 8 states to run the whole FDA registered trial, as well as an oncology trial where we're delivering the oncology drugs right to the patient home and managing the whole trial from afar. So that operating model, it really unlocks access to the scientists and to the patients that want to participate. It's a bit of a middleman kind of glue model, like Uber connects riders and drivers. And so we use technology really as a high-tech, high-touch combination. So you connect the caring part of the physician scientists, perhaps at a university or wherever they are, to the patients in their homes.
I love it. Just a quick question on that. Are you also starting to use any of the wearables or additional devices that collect data that could be relevant to not just the drug that potentially that person's taking for the trial, but how it's impacting their sleep, or are they exercising, all those other parts of a person's body while they're in that trial?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we work at the intersection of research, medicine, and personal health. So a lot of these gadgets, people are engaged with their health. So in the past few months, one I can talk about, we published it already, was we validated a wearable device to measure nighttime scratching. So the way that you currently measure how someone is itchy is you ask them once a month, how itchy are you? And we just validated a device by having patients who are horribly itchy sleep in a sleep lab where we videotape them while they're wearing the device. And our poor coordinators watch the entire video the next day, scoring someone sleeping and scratching. And so it's now the new gold standard for how much you scratch at night, and it can be used at home across the whole country whenever you want it. So that outcome measure called real-world data is a much better way to use that. We're doing it for sleep for some neuroscience projects as well. I can't quite talk about, but
That's a great example, and I think we'll see the therapeutics coming together with a lot of this wearables device to tell us a lot more about side effects and implications. Lisa, you are often in the world of figuring out how these ideas get funded and the financing. Mm-hmm. What are you seeing in this space as we try to bring technology and precision medicine, and I like precision health together?
Yeah, I mean, I do too, because I think from my standpoint in my career, both early on as an entrepreneur and really the past 20 years in venture capital, the focus for me when I think about precision medicine or personalized medicine is I think about it well beyond the pharma and genomics component. I mean, to me, that's an exercise in figuring out the right care for the right person and the right amount and the right time and the right method of delivery. And most of that actually occurs in the delivery system, actually in treatment as opposed to in discovery. So, I mean, obviously you need discovery to have treatment in some form or another. But I think the conversation too often ends at the point of thinking about the use of data for figuring out better patient matching after the approval of drugs and devices and other methodologies, or thinking about how you change behavior. I mean, there's behavioral science that really, in the end, matters so much more in many cases and with many diseases to effective use and effective outcome than does the original science itself. And so I think we have a great opportunity to figure out how to take some of the behavioral science and learn how to customize treatments and interventions to people so they will comply with them and actually use them and take that thing out of the drawer and put it back on, for instance, because that is one of the biggest problems in medicine today is that, on the one hand, patients are non-compliant and aren't interested for many reasons, some of which, are very valid medical reasons. And there also, I think, is a problem that something like a third of medical care that's delivered is wasted or an error, and that could be vastly improved through the use of data delivered real time at the bedside, to doctors helping patients. So I think that it's so important when we talk about cures to go beyond that to actual delivery system outcomes, including the economic side of it, because today there will be no cure that we can come up with in medicine that will get paid for without significant economic scrutiny. And understanding how to validate those economically as well as clinically is a huge part of what I think about as well.
Okay, great. Obviously, it's what our panel's sharing and what we've all been reading about this tremendous potential. And then there's all these questions about who owns the data and how does it actually get shared and how are we intelligent about it and how do we use it. So I would love to go back through and have everyone share, Noah, like you were able to, as much as possible, really specific examples where we've been successful, not just saying that big data and technology should be relevant, but where we're actually landing it, so that everybody can leave today with maybe a couple examples where things are working that you didn't know about before, or opportunities to even participate, and models that others can leverage. Linda, do you want to?
Yeah, well, one of going back to the 23andMe story of how many people have consented to be part of the research platform. It's about 80% of over 1.2 million people now have said, sure, I'll answer the surveys, I will layer that additional information on top of my genome. So I think, and that was the early hope that we would see that kind of participation, so it's been amazing to see that carrying through. So now with all the genetic data just sitting there, all we need to do is put out a survey, people respond to that, and you've got an instant study, which used to take years and years, or if ever it could occur, because we had all of these problems we've been talking about, the silos, the geographic issues. So I think that's a great example of people coming together through the internet, coming in, answering online surveys, and now suddenly you've got a very interesting opportunity to make these discoveries.
So who determines what questions you're asking in the survey, and then who leverages that study as it gets completed?
It's a combination. Internally, the company comes up with their own ideas for surveys. There is a way for the users to put in the questions they would like to ask. And then on top of that, there are partnerships that the company has done with pharma and other research institutions where they might want to pose a question through a survey they design. And then the people consent to say it's okay to share what my response was. But most of the analytics, it's sort of a little bit comparable to the Intel system where all of that still goes on at 23andMe. The data don't get pushed out to the pharmas. A lot of them, frankly, wouldn't know what to do with all the data. And so it's a question that can be asked, and then the analytics can look at that to see, okay, we've got all these controls now, and that's the other thing, the value of having so many people participate is that, especially in a rare condition where if you might ask a question, have you ever been diagnosed with, I don't know, ankylosing spondylitis or something, and most of the people are going to say no, but for those people who say yes, then all those no's are healthy controls. And so it's sort of the case control study design, but it works't in a system like that.
Great, thank you. Noah, your example was fabulous before. Do you have something additional that you would like to share? I want to give you an opportunity.
Yeah, no, I think the data ownership question is very poignant. Like as we want to empower patients with the decision to take part in a trial, we're very strongly advocate for the patient owns all the data that is their biological data, their sequence, et cetera. So individual patients can get that back from us. We become the physician and the scientist during that interaction. So our platform, Nora, is an EMR oriented towards research trials. And so the data quickly is piling up in that platform that combines the specific data focused on the trial, but also the rest of the patient's record, which we have to take care of them as physicians, whatever state they're in. So as physicians, we kind of keep track of everything in a patient's record like a normal EMR. And then our clients are pharma and biotech and sometimes payers. People hire us to do regular science. So they're buying a copy of the data or part of it. And then when it all piles up, the power of the analytics for that, and when you combine with partnerships like 23andMe and attach collaborations together, the power of what you can do with that is profound. And I think we just retained the largest data law firm in the world to help us answer the question about who owns it.
Right.
So I look forward to their work.
Yeah. She'll get a one-line answer back that's really concise.
But it brings up a really good question, though, about how we start to stitch all the data together. And this idea of a universal ID is really critical. Yeah. And that's something where I think we could use the regulatory bodies or the agencies of the government to figure out, okay, what is our system for this? Because that's something you can't do independently. It's got to be done so that we enable the linking.
Some standardization.
Exactly, and so somebody's just got to do that, because once that happens, then our data can connect with your data, can connect with clinical data, and it kind of goes down and just starts amassing around an individual. And when we have the power to do that, it's going to change everything.
I can tell you one group that doesn't own the data. So Amazon Web Services, where all our data is in the cloud, and probably everyone's data is up there.
Right.
And we're in firm agreement that Amazon does not own our data. We pay them to hold it, but
And does Amazon agree with you?
they do.
Okay.
They're
But
on
only
the
if
Okay, they're
advisory
in
board.
agreement also.
But only if you're a Prime member, right?
Yes,
I paid the $99, so it's okay.
for sure.
Right.
Yes, they need your $89 too.
Right.
Lloyd, what have you been building at Stanford that's collecting data and patients and leveraging that insight?
Sure. So in March of 2015, we launched an app with Apple called My Heart Counts that's downloadable from the iTunes store. And this app allows you to measure certain basic parameters using your iPhone. It also allows you to enter data, and it gives you the opportunity, if you wish, to participate in a research study. And to date, over 50,000 people have elected to do that. We recently signed an agreement with 23andMe, so as Linda was mentioning, over 1.2 million people have had genetic testing done through 23andMe, and now those people can elect to have their de-identified data hooked up with their data in My Heart Counts to interpret it in the context of the phenotypic data of their cardiac health. And already, just in the year since the app, a little over a year since the app was launched, we've, for example, over 6,000 people have completed the 6-minute walk test. So, largest cohort of people doing that test that's out there, and that can now be and has been analyzed relative to other parameters about their overall health. So that's one example. We've also worked with Google, now Verily, the Life Sciences Division, on a large longitudinal cohort study of doing genomic testing and also clinical evaluation in a group of about 10,000 people, and then following those people longitudinally in the future. A lot of our ability to interpret the causes of disease has been impaired because we don't have normative data in many cases. And the only way to get that is through one very powerful way to get it is through a longitudinal cohort study.
Great, thank you.
That's a great point. It's a great segue. So there's a couple of examples I'll share from Intel's work that bring together disparate forms of health data that traditionally don't speak to one another to drive some clear health value proposition. And Lloyd, your point was a great one about there not being sort of a normalized understanding of a lot of this data. I'll focus on a couple of applications where we do have a deep understanding, and these types of tools were used for better disease management. So we partnered with Cerner, an electronic medical record company, to develop a tool that is called the St. John Sepsis Agent. Have anyone heard about this agent? So it's used in a number of Cerner hospitals and provider networks where it's a real-time tool that ingests information from the medical record. It's an inpatient tool, and it's something that clinicians enlist when a person is admitted to the hospital. It calculates a person's risk of developing sepsis on arrival, and then real-time recalculates that risk during their hospital stay. And as you know, Elisa talked about medical errors a moment ago. People's deterioration in the inpatient setting is inexcusable, and often it's caught too late. And just in the last several months that this tool has been in use, a couple of years now actually, it's been predicted that it has saved 2,700 plus lives due to early detection. And again, it's not that there's new science involved, it's just an ability to more granularly and without exception, right? There's lots of human fault in monitoring patients. It's putting CPU towards what computers do better than humans. So this is one application where there's more data than a human could possibly ingest and comprehend, and a surveillance that supersedes anything that humans were able to do. A second quick example, a little bit less acute, is in that of Parkinson's care. Many of you know that we've had a deep partnership with the Michael J. Fox Foundation now for years. We have custom-generated algorithms using the Pebble Watch and raw data coming in from the Pebble Watch to interpret unique Parkinson tremor and Parkinson gait and other motor disorders that the Pebble Watch is not designed to pick up, but algorithms combined with that watch are able to pick up. And now, after studying more than 1,000 patients with Parkinson's disease around the world, physicians are starting to be able to custom titrate medication regimens. This is not a new drug. This is simply titrating the dose frequency and dose amount around an individual's needs for drug. So these are a couple of examples of how people's symptomatology on the one hand, life on the other hand, is being impacted by this plethora of data that's now kind of interpretable by computers.
That's fabulous. I'm the optimist, and I think Lloyd was saying earlier, right? You have to be an optimist to be in this field, but to hear the things that are happening that are so tangible and not just the big data hype that we all see the headlines on, I think it's really powerful. I think, Lisa, will you also share, I think, what the Heart Association is starting to look at?
There's so many interesting examples. Heart Association, with whom I'm doing a bunch of work right now, is starting a cardiovascular precision medicine institute. There's so much emphasis on cancer, and thank God there is, but actually cardiovascular disease kills far more people in the United States and everywhere else on earth than does cancer. And not many people are focused on the precision medicine issues related to cardiovascular disease. So they're forming all sorts of interesting relationships with industry. They've done stuff with Google and with other big tech companies and with IBM, and to form knowledge and information and allow that to be utilized by either clinicians in research or actual clinicians delivering care to, their vision is to make it a much more precise world of cardiovascular medicine. One of the things that I was thinking about as I was sitting here and as a sort of an interesting another approach to big data and how it makes a difference, I think, in medicine, is a company that was formed as a joint venture between Dignity Health, United Healthcare, Baylor, and a number of other hospital systems. And the company's focus, and I'm just absolutely blanking on the name of it right now, but it'll come to me in the middle of somebody else's talk, so I'll
Or someone
blurt
can
out
Google
rudely.
it and shout it out for her.
But what they've done is they've taken, if you look at those organizations, United Healthcare, which is one of the largest health IT companies on earth, and of course the largest insurance company, so they have access to claims and pharmacy and lab data for tens of millions of people. Baylor Health System and several other health systems like Dignity, who represent some of the largest repositories of electronic medical record data. And they've pulled all this together into a central, sort of focused methodology of analysis to identify retrospectively the medical devices, and they're starting to go category by category, that are most effective, and they define that as least negative side effects, most cost effective in their health system. And they're saying, okay, if I look across all drug-eluting stents, of which there are 9 or something like that, which across all of that data prove out to be the least problematic, the most cost effective? Let's pick the top 2 and then go negotiate better favorable volume rates and offer that across that entire health network. And I think that's a totally interesting and different use of big data for better clinical outcome that's really profound, because it gets right to, weeding out things that are less valuable in any way you want to describe that. And this is the heart of the economic issues that we have, for how drugs and devices are discretionarily chosen in the healthcare system. There you go. That's it. Shared clarity. We have a winner.
Thank you.
I knew it started with SH, but I could only come up with other words.
I'm glad you held off.
Yeah, really. I feel so much better now. There's other companies that are commercializing now, young companies, and there have been several over the years. One of my first investments in healthcare was in a similar type of company back when technology and healthcare economics didn't quite live up to the promise. But now, as they start to become more valuable, there's companies like Health Reveal, which are smaller young companies that are amalgamating all of this data, the wearables, implantable data with sensors, EMRs, electronic medical records, lab, pharmacy, claims, sort of the whole gamut that they're looking to integrate and run behind the scenes, running against algorithms where they've codified evidence-based medicine. So they actually go into the best practice guidelines that are published in Journal of American Medicine, New England Journal, whatever. Those types of things where if you follow those practices, you do better as a physician, but it takes the whole clinical world on average something like 15 to 17 years for that stuff to trickle all the way down, because nobody can keep up with the level of knowledge that's created. So they literally codify it. They run all the patient data through those algorithms in order to identify in advance, almost like your credit card fraud monitoring system is doing right now.
Right.
Somebody's monitoring your credit card. If it gets used, they're saying, is that you? Is that not you? Is that a right circumstance? Well, this is doing the same thing, saying, is that you? Wow, that doesn't look right. You had a stroke some time ago. You're, creating data that would suggest you might have another one, we should call the doctor that takes care of you and give them that data and let them know they should do something. And specifically, here's what they should do. So not just predictive medicine, prescriptive medicine, making the data actionable at the point of care. So I think there's a number of other companies that are trying to do similar types of things, but I think that's such an important part of this is how do you get it all the way to the end where you're actually taking care of people in where there's passive sensors and passive data analysis, but actionable outcome at the end.
And this is where I think other tech companies that we can learn from are like PayPal. And Peter wrote about this in his book, 0 to 1, about using algorithms to spot patterns. But then I guess the story was they kept trying to tweak the algorithm so that it could do it all in this machine, and it just wasn't working. And then they brought the human beings back in, and that was the right combination, right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, so I think we're going to see the same thing in the health system, that we'll use a lot of the analytical power, but then we still have to have the doctors and the other people come in at the right time to say, yep, this, or even the person themselves, where things are pointed to them to say, something's not right here. You
Only
might
half
want
the
to go talk to your
doctors will
doctor.
be replaced by robots, not all of them.
Right.
No, maybe some.
So we just heard some great examples of clinical implications and utility that are impacting patients' lives and how medicine is conducted. How is all of this going to get paid for? We know there's vast amounts of data. There's great queries that can be run on that data and used in really powerful ways. But how does this get monetized and paid for in such a way that these undertakings are sustainable or building businesses, or we can really fully leverage all that's being collected? I'll throw this out there. This is a round robin of who's got this answer.
I'll just make one high-level point that a lot of the potential in this type of data is really something I would characterize as basic science phase right now. Some of the examples that we've talked about harness tangible value, are monetizable in the near term, but most of the potential energy in this space is really in the field, in the realm of basic research, and we don't typically look at basic research from a monetization lens, and I think we should remember that in this conversation.
Well, I think also, the big money, like in a lot of these stories of history, the people who are making a lot of money right now are the guys building the platforms to move the data around. So the pick and shovel guys, right? And essentially, in the end, who makes the money is who figures out how to actually melt the gold down and build it into something. Right. So in the end, I think these practical examples of how you take all that knowledge that's been created through data and make an actionable decision out of it in some way is something that will get paid for, because you can prove the actionable decision can result in lower costs in the healthcare system. And people are willing to spend money to save money. They're not willing to spend money to spend more money anymore.
I would just pile on in the terms of looking for new cures and drug discovery. What I've learned since working on industry trials is that the highest value proposition is speed. It's not the dollars you spend on the trial, it's the speed of the trial. So every day the drug's not in the market, it's $1 million. And so the way we do trials is 30 to 40% faster on average than the traditional model. And so that speeding up the idea or the patent all the way to the market can bring down the cost of drug discovery dramatically. And so that hopefully could either be passed along to the consumers or the payers and ultimately reinvested in developing more drugs than you could before. So the value proposition of using technology for drug discovery is clear as a bell.
Definitely.
And at the health care delivery system level, because of the push towards bundled payments, towards away from fee-for-service medicine and more towards reimbursement systems that look on outcomes, those systems, such as ones described by Asha and Linda, that are validated to produce better outcomes either in the hospital or keeping people healthy and out of the hospital, are going to have a clear monetization value in the healthcare delivery system, because there's going to be more and more emphasis on maintaining people healthy and at home and reserving the services of the hospital for the ultra-complicated patients.
I think that's such an interesting point, that the whole world of medicine, particularly hospital systems, has been built on attracting people in to treat them. And you have to turn the whole thing upside down and say, we don't want you. You got to change the whole culture of delivery system medicine and say, we don't want you to come in, we want you to be healthy. That's how we make money. And how, the data needs to be utilized to make that whole system-wide cultural transition, which is so fundamental to the value proposition here. I think we have to not be thinking about this in the old linear way that we have.
Well, that's
And
why
Lisa, how do-
Kaiser, I think, I'm sorry.
Sorry, no, go-
Sorry, Lloyd. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, Lisa, how do you think, in some of the companies that you work with, how is that occurring now, and how do you think it'll occur in the future?
Well, I think it's occurring painfully.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I think there's a lot of folks who are starting companies like this Health Reveal that I mentioned and are trying to sell them into delivery systems that are still really 90% fee for service. You know, they're talking the talk and they're trying to walk the walk, but they are far from running, right? And it's for lots of reasons. And I think there's a big disconnect today between the value proposition for many of these companies and how these organizations still get paid.
Yes.
So I think the collaboration efforts that are going, all sorts of weird bedfellows, right? All sorts of weird and strange partnerships going on. You know, if anybody would have told me that the Heart Association would partner with AstraZeneca, okay, I believe that. And Google, really? You know, to do a major research initiative, I would have said, that's pretty weird, you know? Or some of the connections that you guys have going at Stanford. I mean, all right, you're in the heart of Silicon Valley, that's easy. But Geisinger and Merck just did a huge partnership thing. You know, Merck put $25 million into Geisinger. That's kind of odd, you know, to develop a cardiovascular program together using data and sensors and the like. So I think the drive will come from these unique partnerships, which will be the bridge between now and future, you know, economic reality.
But Kaiser is such an interesting model, right? They're the payer and they're the
Right.
provider, and they've got the patients, they've got all that data. So I think if we can move more to systems like that, where they want to try to keep people healthy, otherwise they have to pay for their care. But I think on the consumer side, and this is where, again, we're Silicon Valley panel, where we can look to tech companies. So from our perspective, this is all about social networks and people coming on board, and it's all hopefully a viral thing that will grow and will have many, many people. And then there are all of the revenue models that you can build around that are more like something like Evernote, for example, which is a freemium model. For the most part, people can use it for free, but apparently about 6% of their users are willing to pay a little bit extra for, I don't know what these features are because I'm not one of those 6%, but they've said that stays even, or it stays at 6% as they grow, and so that scales very nicely. And so I think that's one thing that you can consider in a true consumer model where people get additional value and they're willing to pay for that. But there are all kinds of other things like affiliate partnerships, you know, and I don't even want to bring up the ads word, but I think ads can be done very usefully and in a way that people could get additional value. They'll learn about companies that provide services they've never heard of before. I think there's a lot of room to improve how we position ads to people online, but if it's for clinical trials or whatever it is, that people, I think, would welcome them, especially if they're done not like the media does them. Anything but how the media gives us ads, which is terrible.
Great, thank you. So we have about 10 minutes, and I was going to open it up to questions, but I just wanted to be sure, was there anything burning that you all wanted to share that we didn't cover, or you feel, okay, we're
That's
good.
great.
I saw lots.
Wow.
So we'll start in the front row and work our way down. There's a microphone that is supposed to, do you want to bring it up? Yeah. Okay. Right here in the front corner, and then can you just pass down and we'll kind of do it.
I'm Jackie Brandwin, and I have my own company. And yesterday I was very depressed, and today I feel a lot better.
That's what Silicon Valley can do for
I'll
you.
tell you why. My company has two sides. One is that we develop biotech company, mostly in the cancer area, from the very start and all the way through phase 2. And we are one of the few at early companies. The other side is that we have communication with consumers, about 5 million consumers. And one of the things I've heard, which was very depressing, from my knowledge, is that I get a lot of companies calling and say, where are the people who are willing to have a clinical trial? And on the other hand, I have many, many requests, and usually it's a family member that calls and say, are there any clinical trials? And up to today, you know, we kind of struggle. There's a little, trial.com, which we went to the NIH. The NIH told us there's nothing. They're all terrible. And
So now you can call Noah.
well, now that's why I feel optimistic. So now the next question is, many of you have answered and have presented opportunities, but how do we get all these opportunities to the consumer? I mean, how do if I have not attended this lecture, I would never know about your company. And yes, I have been in touch with Stanford and others, but there is a gap. And how do you talk to each other as to what you have available so that we can bring it to the consumer? And there's one more thing. You have to do it in human language. Many of these trials are so, so technical that the consumer shies away from it, has no idea what it means. So those are my observations.
Well, I'm glad it's been an optimistic undertaking. That's a big question on how all of these opportunities are shared and come together in better ways, and probably should be a panel next year. Does anyone have anything you want to?
I mean, I would just say thanks for pointing out those features of, the consumers who want to take part. We hear that all the time, and, if you look at just targeted oncology trials, you can do the sequencing on the tumors and then the patients call, and there's all these ways to search. But ultimately, the fundamental problem is that patient still has to live near UCLA or near a site. And so you will hear about us in a few weeks launching this oncology trial first to the whole state of California, where patients with any solid tumor with one of several mutations can stay at home. We ship the drug to them, and they're in that clinical trial the whole time. So you can search lung cancer or prostate cancer, and you'll find us on Google.
Well, we should.
Yeah,
Okay.
I unfortunately can't tell you about it just yet, but soon.
Thank you. Thank you all. This is awesome. I think the world needs more of you guys saving the world, literally. So thank you all. No, I was truly fascinated by what you had to say. And to follow up on what you were just adding, how do people that don't live near centers of academic excellence, near the Stanfords, near the NYUs, MSKs, MD Andersons, how do they get in touch with you? How do they find what trials are available? How do they participate? You asked a question earlier. How many people would want to participate in a clinical trial? And I would want to, but I don't have no idea how to. So how do people find out what you're doing, participate for loved ones, for relatives, or for common interest?
Yeah, so just our company, it's a platform company. We're the scientists. We run the trials. We engage directly with the patients and take care of them. And right now, our open trials are some in rare disease, Alzheimer's, acne, dermatology. This month, we'll launch into oncology trials. So until you're at that moment personally, you're not looking for you're not searching prostate cancer or acne yourself. When your teenager has pimples, you will be searching acne clinical trials probably. And so we use a highly collaborative approach, so Google, Facebook, Twitter, all the the young kids stuff that people do. I think I have an Instagram account. And then we also partner with lots of foundations, patient advocacy groups. We work with EMR analytics companies, so you can find those patients. 23andMe is a good example. Like, those collaborations help patients that want to know about trials find them. It's really, we consider it an ad as well, but it's an opportunity or education because it's presenting the opportunity, and then the patient is out looking for those trials, and so that connection happens through a lot of different collaborations.
I would also point you towards Patients Like Me or Smart Patients or
Yes.
some of the social sites that are meant to, amass patients of a common interest and feed them information about that type of
It's
thing.
also where the disease foundations are doing a really good job being patient advocates and pulling patients together, and have been one of the sources of patients that then they can get into clinical trials faster because they've got a set of patients accumulated. And that's where I think you've seen the disease foundations really shift what their value is in the market in a big way. I know the sorry.
I'd like to make one point that affects everybody in the room, whether you have a condition or not. The Precision Medicine Initiative that's rolling out this year
that's right.
is a
Thank you.
phenomenal opportunity for people to engage in clinical trials, even if you are healthy and well and want to contribute to the body of understanding of preventative disease. So look out for that. The 1 million person cohort is going to be enrolling very soon, and I think that's something every American can get involved with.
And Kathy's here and can tell us all about it too, right?
Who's got the microphone?
How will HIPAA be changed in this new age of Silicon Valley accelerating solutions for patients?
Great question. Lindy, you want to start? I know you haven't had to think about this at all.
Lindy. Well, actually, the interesting thing is that HIPAA's not, it's not the big boogeyman that everybody thinks it is. It's actually a pretty easy standard to meet, and I think a lot of tech companies probably exceed whatever is required through HIPAA. So I think it just needs to be discussed. And so early on at 23andMe, we brought in the lawyer who actually wrote a lot of the language of HIPAA, and he looked at our whole model and what we did, and he just said, you guys you don't fall under HIPAA requirements because we weren't part of the payer system. There was no reimbursement, none of that was going on at the time. So, but despite that, I think our systems, we built them to be bulletproof as much as we could anyway. So I think that's how a lot of companies approach it. But I think the hardest part is doctor to doctor. Information, how can that be shared in a way that doesn't really make people nervous? I think that's where we need to fix the system more than companies who are building places to put data.
Yeah. Lloyd, is there anything there you'd like to?
Well, I think the other big question is ensuring data security,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
HIPAA is one. But just look at the number of breaches we've read about just in the past 12 months.
Just a
right?
Princess medical record alone in the last couple weeks,
And it's a huge problem for the people who are the real true experts. It's a huge problem. So, but for people to feel comfortable with sharing their data, HIPAA or no HIPAA, we have to be able to ensure that we're going to protect that data. And I know there's a lot of emphasis among the tech companies on developing better methods to do that.
That could be a whole nother panel.
Absolutely.
Right.
Also,
Absolutely.
do you want to pass the mic up here, or it might be back there, and then it'll come this way.
Hi, you guys, this is amazing and such important work, and I think needs to be talked about a lot more broadly. One of the things that's happening in San Francisco right now is San Francisco General Hospital is in the process of finally getting onto an EMR. And they're going to have to raise over $300 million to go do this, and it's a great example of what's happening around the country and around the world. The issue is that if you look at the way that Epic, which is the system that they'll go on to, is billing, or the way that they track data, it's not really research focused, right? It's billing focused. And that seems to be a really major issue, and a lot of you are addressing these issues, but doctors every single day, oncologists are sitting there putting in data that's really more about billing, and there's so much data being lost. So is there a way that we can address that? Is there, and it's a little upsetting as we go and raise this money for this EMR to think about the fact that we're going to be investing $300 million in a system that isn't really going to allow UCSF to continue to be at the forefront.
I can weigh in on the investment in that. Like, I have my background in EMR and diagnostic error. I feel that point very strongly. But in the platform we built, thanks to Qualcomm, Novartis, and Lux Capital, our investors, we built an EMR from scratch that is research focused, meaning every data point in it is true and accurate. It has nothing to do with billing because all that's paid for by someone else. And so that approach to, you can build an EMR from scratch for a lot less than $300 million, I can assure you. We just did it in a year. And so that approach of combining science with an EMR is a very, very different approach, and it's why we're very cautious about partnering our platform into EMRs, because we know 30% of the info in the EMR is wrong. So
I mean, that's the answer. It's going to be layers built on top of EMRs and doing different functions and collecting more data, and finding ways to make that work for the physician workflow and the nurse workflow is the hard part there. And also then interoperability. I think there's actually a lot of data in the EMRs that we don't even use. That's good,
Clearly.
Really good and valuable data. Even just claims alone have so much clinical data in them, but we don't use it very often. And to the extent we can build layers on top, but more importantly, that the EMR vendors allow for the interoperability and free flow of that data back and forth is going to be the trick here.
Question in the front.
So I was interested in your comments in the next few years, how you see directionally the issue of quality of life data. So we talk a lot about drug development, but we don't really talk about quality of life not as an endpoint, but actually as the endpoint. And so I wondered if you sort of had comments about how you see that evolving in terms of the FDA, in terms of your own practices in the next few years.
Yeah, amazing question. We grapple with this so heavily in our shop because in addition to the 2 device trials that we just validated, one of the projects we're working on keeps track of how active someone is with a debilitating disease. And the gold standard for the outcome is, bleeding in joints. you can just measure that. But how active they are because they're in less pain can be measured by an actigraphy device. And so that diary of like how well you feel versus how much you move around and play as a kid, like there's a lot of interest from the agency and also from the sponsors to really focus in on that because that's what the patient cares about.
Well, and I think we need to go back to basics too, which I think unfortunately our medical systems have sort of lost I don't know if it's the interest or the focus on the basics of life: sleeping, eating. When do you talk to your doctor about what you eat? It's not even part of most conversations. And there's so much new knowledge coming out about what is actually probably a better plan for eating, and will we have customized food that we understand, knowing our own body types, our own metabolism, that we'll start to learn. But I think it's a huge, or two legs of this system that are just not really incorporated into it. And I think that's where we're going to see more of the consumers focusing on what makes me feel better. I sleep better when I do this or that. And the wearable data, I think, are coming along, but I think they'll get better and people will be armed with more information that they can then share back into the medical system. So I think it's going to be a push rather than a pull.
But there's a lot of emphasis now coming, not here, but coming on shared decision making, patient-reported outcomes as part of that treatment and planning and all that. And I think that will be, and even the FDA is starting to put patients on panels, and companies are starting to bring patients into the design of clinical trials and things like that. I think it's going to be a huge part of the next 20 years.
Okay, we've got a question here and then there.
To peek into and look into the future, it's been exciting to see in the past few years at the conference how this is gaining momentum, and it seems like we're on the verge of a tipping point that will revolutionize and disturb the healthcare industry. Nevertheless, I was diagnosed in 1988 with a lymphoma, and I was treated at the MD Anderson. And just for peace of mind, I go there every year and have a checkup. Things have not changed a bit. The doctor comes out with a white robe. I still wait in the waiting room. The same procedure is done every single year. So on the one hand, you have all this disruptive technology and people thinking outside of the box and redefining the way the physicians are going to look and work in the future, and the patient is ready to see you now, and all of these things. But then again, you go to the hospital, you go to the doctor, and things don't seem to change. So peeking into the future, when do you guys believe that this disruption is going to take place and people...
This one's for Lloyd, obviously.
You want to put a timeline on this?
I think it's already here in some form. So we do a large number of telemedicine visits now in our primary care clinics, making primary care physicians available till 11 p.m. People can sign up same day for a 15-minute appointment at 10 o'clock in the evening after they finish work. Now, that's not going to work for every case, but in the case that you just described, a sort of routine follow-up, if the physician has access to your appropriate laboratory studies and can communicate with you and perhaps your local physician, a trip to MD Anderson may not necessarily be necessary in the future.
I want to three remarks. My background, I am the chairman of Teva Pharmaceutical. This is one of the biggest pharma in the world. But more interesting, I was the CEO of the largest healthcare provider in Israel, second only to Kaiser. This is an integrated healthcare, and we have done things that you are trying to do now, not with all of that, but trying to look on the integrated healthcare like 20 years ago. And three remarks out of that. One, you have to change the reimbursement model because it cannot work, whatever, and I'm enlightened to be here. It's really different, and I'm hearing a lot of conferences like this. But you have to change the reimbursement model. Because if I'm speaking with the big retail, and I'm speaking with United or others, and they say they want to see return on investment in 2 years, you cannot do it in 2 years. You have to change the way federal is looking on it, because you cannot look at it on a budget of 1 year. So that's one. While doing all this innovation, you have to do it, one. Secondly, I'm not a great believer, and I am an e-health person by myself. I'm not a great believer in all these, apps and all of it, unless they are part of an ecosystem. And you have to build the ecosystem around. That means you have to take physician inside. So it's nice to build an EMR by yourself because you are lucky. You are in the place where pharma is and we are deep pocket and we will pay. But if your EMR cannot speak at the end with the EMR of the physician, huge problem.
It does.
In 5 years from now, okay, so that's exactly what I'm trying to say. This should be part and somebody which should look at it as an ecosystem and try to build it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Great points. Okay, we probably have time for one last question.
Hi. Is there any way that we can incentivize patients to participate by giving them lower health premiums, giving them lower deductibles, giving them ways to sort of push them into the system and also enlighten them about the benefits of taking part? And it's really a two-way street.
It's already being done. I mean, there are already health insurance products, both self-insured ones and from groups like United Healthcare and others that do exactly that, that pay for, you know, the people, the members to get biometrics done and submit them to centralized databases, that pay for them to come in and get certain kinds of checkups and the like. It's not widespread. And the problem, I think, that has been identified is that the patient wearies of it quickly because they don't sense the return on investment they're making in that, even though they get some cash back or some better. You know, it's hard to find that number that motivates enough people to really make a huge difference. But it is starting, and I think you're seeing lots of the employers, in particular at the self-insured level, try to figure out that dynamic since they have the long-term relationship with the members in the way that the insurance companies do not, and they're not as incentive to keep that going for as long.
And you absolutely have to be quite cautious about coercing or incenting
Right.
patients to take part in research. So that's somebody else's decision. The IRB sets the rate, how much you can pay someone, but if you participation in research, very different ballgame than participation in wellness programs.
One last question.
Recently, Jane Brody in the New York Times wrote an article about the appendix, that years ago it wasn't thought as being needed. And several people, I for one, had mine extracted as an extra undergoing surgery. Are any of you addressing this today? Because she notes that the appendix can filter the toxins in one's body. And without it, you may be at a disadvantage.
Lloyd, do you have any?
Well, I think one of the dilemmas is that a lot of the recommendations we've made in medicine over the years subsequently have been shown to be based upon inadequate data sets and or flawed analyses. I don't know specifically about data referable to the appendix. That's something we need to look into in more detail. But it does point out the need for these larger longitudinal studies. And you know, one of the most amazing things to me is that 80% of adults on the planet in 2020 will have access to a smartphone. And that's a real game changer in terms of the way they can communicate with us and we can communicate with them, and how people can be much more engaged in their health and wellness and in their sick care than they're able to be today. I think we're just at the cusp of this revolution, and it's going to be an exciting decade ahead.
I heard that a Stanford med student is just about to teach the iPhone how to take the appendix out.
I think that clearly the market opportunity is to use the app to put it back in.
That seems like a great wrap up. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you for joining us.